Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Hanovi Schoonover, Operations Specialist at Redwind Consulting, and I'll be hosting this event. Before we begin, for those who may not know, Redwind is a nonprofit organization that provides tribal technical assistance on a variety of programs, including but not limited to tribal college campus, children and youth, and elder abuse. This ranges from policy review via email to site visits. If you're interested, you can contact me at hanovi@red-wind.net. That's HONOVI at red-wind.net. You can also visit our website at red-wind.net for additional information on services we provide, upcoming events, and resources such as handouts and guidebooks that you can download. As the states, this project is supported by grant number 2017 TA AX K023, awarded by the Office of Violence Against Women, U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. This webinar is a part of our Children and Youth Project, and presenting with us today is Raquel DeHerrera. Raquel is part of the Taos Pueblo, Chiricahua Apache, and Mexican descent, and has been with Redwind for over 5 years, becoming the project coordinator for Redwind's Tribal College Campus Technical Assistance Project. She has been a trainer for the National Tribal Advocate Center and has presented at Redwind's Creating Sister Space Conference, along with the Creating a Safe Space to Heal conference. Raquel has also provided webinars on documentation within tribal transitional housing programs, safety planning in a transitional housing program, education groups, and decolonizing trauma. Before we begin, this event does have captioning, which you'll need to manually turn on from the menu. If you have any questions or comments, you can put them into the chat box or the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. You can also click on the hand icon if you would like to give your questions or comments verbally. You're going to be muted, so if we see the hand, we can then unmute you so that you can then ask your question. If you have any tech issues, you can send a private message to me and we will try to get that resolved as quickly as possible. And I will now turn it over to Raquel.
Thank you, Hanovi. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thanks for that introduction. And I just want to kind of talk a little bit about just some more background experience with my work with children. So before I worked with Redwind, before I was an advocate, I was into the early childhood education field for over 10 years. So I worked a lot with children under 5 and in a school setting. And then in an education setting. So I kind of started there and I've moved into advocacy and, I first started with special projects with Redwind where, I kind of helped here and there with children and youth and transitional housing. And then I became an advocate with the HACIA Advocate Program, which is a local advocacy program through Redwind in Colorado Springs. And so I started off as an advocate and then I moved into the program director there. And now I currently work with tribal colleges and campuses or colleges and universities on their sexual assault response. And so one thing that is my passion is children and really helping create a world where violence is, not breaking our communities and our children's hearts, So I was really honored that Amber had asked me to do this presentation. And so really when I present this, I'm presenting from an advocate lens and then also just some of my experience working in early childhood education, which, can be very different and similar, in secondary schooling or elementary schooling, but really this is just me connecting ways that as advocates, we can really work with schools and how schools can work with advocates and how we can really help reduce the trauma, or just the impact of trauma in our kiddos' lives. So I just wanted to kind of introduce myself in that lens of really just my experience. I would love if you all would, in the chat box, just, introduce yourself and what you do, just so I can kind of get an idea of, who are advocates on this webinar, or who are educators, or, just whatever field you're in. I would love to see that. And it will kind of give me an idea of, where to lead this to. And I see some people are already responding in the chat. So it's really nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us. We have a rural DV essay program, the Healing House. And then we have Honor. I know Honor. So good to see you here, victim specialist. And so really, I think starting this off, really talking about how domestic violence and our intimate partner violence, I kind of use those interchangeably, how that impacts children and how children are interconnected in this. So we're funded through the Office on Violence Against Women. And so, one of the things that we cover are children exposed to violence. So it's not, child abuse and neglect. It's really that exposure to violence. But I also think it's important to note that children who are exposed to violence or live in a household where domestic or intimate partner violence happens, they're more at risk to be physically abused, emotionally abused. And so, I think it's important that, as advocates, we know kind of where, especially for OVW, if we're OVW funded and our programs are, we're really thinking about that exposure to violence. And then we're also going to probably be working with other organizations or, social services who really, they respond to children who have been abused or neglected. And I argue in just my, I think exposure to violence is violence. And, but really when we think about what that means for OVW, it's really that exposure to violence, seeing the violence in the home, just being exposed to that. And really, I put this power and control wheel in because I think it kind of talks a little bit about, there's the part using children. So it really talks about using visitations to harass the non-offending parent. I've seen that a lot, when I was an advocate, visitation turned into a way that the abuser could control the survivor. And so that's where children were being used, making the part I'm going to use her just because that's what's in the power and control will. And because we do know intimate partner violence and domestic violence impacts women greatly. So I will use that, but just know that I'm not implying that men cannot be victims, or I've worked with dads who who've been abused. And so I want to just state that, but really making her feel guilty about the children. So this could be, guilty, maybe her parenting style, or the way she's dressing the children or taking care of them. But there's this critique, criticizing just her around surrounding the children. And then using children to relay messages. So, go tell your mom that her dinner is awful, or go tell your mom that, she's stupid, or just having children relay messages that are really part of that, threat and just emotional abuse as well. And then again, visitations to harass them or threatening to take children away. So this is another one that I've experienced as an advocate, really, where, if you leave me, then you don't have a job, you're not going to be able to support the children, and the courts are going to give me the children because I can financially support them. Or, I'm the this is my house and you don't have a place to provide for children. So using these threats, and this is using children to maintain and exert power and control over their partners. And I think these all kind of intersect when we think about male privilege. I think from a big systems picture, we're looking at this male privilege of women are the primary caretakers. Women are, they're responsible for a lot of the children's needs, emotional needs, nurturing, that's kind of the implication. And so using male privilege, trying to get and interfere with her parenting and use that as a tactic, and using that male privilege. You're not brushing their hair correctly. You're not making them nutritious meals. You're not, and it's using this male privilege that's her responsibility to do that, and not really taking, the responsibility of co-parenting. So I've seen that. And then even economic abuse, I kind of mentioned before. I make the money, I provide for our family. And so if you decide to leave, the courts are going to give me the children because I can support them financially. Things like that. Isolation. We know, I'm a parent, I have a 6-year-old, and something that I have learned tremendously is how much community I need and how much support I need as a parent, as a mom, as someone raising children. You need that support. So isolation, if you use isolation, you take that support system away, and you take those resources that are needed to be a parent and to, do that work. That's one way. So these are all kind of interconnected, using coercion and threats, but in here, the tactic is children specifically, and they all kind of intersect with one another. And so I kind of wanted to start this off. I know it's like an abrupt, really just getting into it, but really I wanted to talk about how, when we talk about kids who are exposed to violence, a lot of it is this, and I've had, people who say, the kids were asleep when a lot of this would happen, or I don't know that they were really aware. And I think it's really important to note that kids pick up on a lot of things, and they notice things, they pay attention. And even though they might not have the words to really express what they express or even process what they've seen, they're seeing it. And so, and it's just little things, not little things, but it's things, everyday occurrences of these things that really create stress, create a stress response for kids, create dysfunction in the home, creates a lot of turmoil, and really can be impactful. So I really wanted to start this off. And I didn't put this in the slide, but I do know this is a heavy topic. We'll be talking about exposure to violence and teen dating violence. And I know these topics are really hard. So if there's ever a moment that you need to take a moment to walk away and look out a window, or just get some movement, I really welcome you to do that. And then also I have my contact information at the end. So if you want to process something after this webinar, I'm here to help in any way. And I should have started that off with that disclosure. I apologize, but it is hard. It's heavy. Really what I want to focus on is how we as advocates can work with schools, and how schools can work with advocate programs, and how they can implement and what they can do to really help children who have been exposed to violence, or teens who who are victims or survivors of teen dating violence. So I use this, and Novi, the next slide, please. I think I kind of just talked about this really. So interfering with caretaking, this is one I didn't really specify, but if a woman is breastfeeding her children and they're interfering with that, they're not allowing her to do that. They are prohibiting her from tending to the needs of her children. If, they're crying and she wants to go and respond, and the abusive partner is not letting them take care of those needs, that's kind of interfering with caretaking. Challenging the authority of the non-offending parent. Authority is a weird thing, because I don't like to use that when we think about our role as parents. We don't want to, have authority over our children, but really when I think about it is just, decisions that they make. So, if you decide to say, no, we're not going to have ice cream tonight, and then the abusive parent turns around and says, oh yes, we are going to have ice cream. I'm going to go take you to get you ice cream. And can you believe that she didn't let you have ice cream? Those type of things. I'm really challenging the parenting. Again, using children to relay abusive messages to non-offending parents. And then threatening to take children away, and then using visitations to kind of assert that power and control over the non-offending parent. So those are just some ways that I've seen it, or, in trainings that we've talked about, that these are just some ways, but there are many, many ways. I think abusers are really the creative, for lack of a better word, insidiously creative with how they use these tactics. And so when we think about it, this is how children are exposed to violence, and it might not, it's, when I think about exposure to violence, it's not even seeing physical violence. It's these interactions that they're exposed to on a day-to-day basis that, again, are very stressful. They're very confusing. They're traumatic. And so really thinking about that, this is, when we want to think about advocating for children, we want to look at it in the lens of this. That can be really harmful. Next slide, please. So domestic violence and its impact on children and youth. When I do a lot of impact, or I like to look at the holistic impact, so that's physical impacts, mental, emotional, and our spiritual wellness. And I know that there can be some add others, other components, but I really focus on these 4 things. And some of this guidance is from the ACE. It's I can't remember what the acronym is right now. It's kind of leaving my mind, but the CDC and the Kaiser Permanente did a study, and it was really a survey asking, people's experiences when they were children, and it's adverse childhood experiences. That's what the ACE means. And I don't have anything on this, but if you would like more information, I can send you some information on this. But it was a study that they found where adults who had, 4 or more, or I can't remember the number specifically, but if you answered yes to a lot of these questions, it was interrelated with the health of them as they were older. So chronic illnesses, substance abuse, risk factors for violence, and things like that. And so we know that, and it's I kind of think about the statement where it's like, well, especially around spanking, the argument for those who are proponents of it are always like, well, I was, and I turned out fine. And what the ACEs really show is no, a lot of these things we don't turn out fine. They're interconnected and related to a lot of things that we might just seem as like an isolated incident. So your high blood pressure, you might just think genetics, or we often go to food and activity, but it could be very much linked. And what this study showed is that it can be linked to trauma that you experienced as children. And so we think about immediate impacts. There's the physical impact. So the risk of physical harm is exponentially higher if they are exposed to violence or live in a household where there's violence. Stomach aches, headaches, sleep changes. So a lot of these things that, become sudden and onset and are constant. Then there's the mental impact. So chronic stress, I think, is a big one for kids. They don't really have, especially for the younger kids, it's really hard for them to say, I'm just stressed. So you'll see it manifest as other things. But there's chronic stress, brain development, anxiety, and PTSD. And there's one thing that I thought was really important, and this is from, I think it was 2010, I can't remember, but American Indian and Alaska Native children suffer exposure to violence at higher rates than any other racial group in the United States. And this was through the US Department of Justice, the task force. I think it was Obama and Biden, they had created a task force on this. And this was the report that had come out from American Indian and Alaska Native children and youth who were exposed to violence. And they found that the rates of that exposure to violence were higher amongst any other racial group in the United States. And then this one, they also experienced post-traumatic stress disorder 3 times the rate of the general population, the same as soldiers coming back from Afghanistan, from that same report. So when we think about PTSD and that mental impact, 3 times from the general population, that's huge when we think about that. And so it's really important as we start thinking about, as advocates. I know when I was an advocate, a lot of the time, the people who walked through my door were parents. They had children. And so, to really think about how are we responding to the family unit? How are we really thinking about those kiddos who come in and they might seem perfectly fine, but, really thinking about how can we help, allocate some of those resources. Another study that just came out very recently, it was a new report in June, and I think I found it on, it's the traumatic, it was Neurology Today, and it really shows how adverse childhood experiences may underlie neurological conditions. So really thinking about neurology, so just the health and well-being of our brain health, and really thinking about, especially from 0 to 18, when we think about, our brains aren't even fully developed until, our 20s. So to think about all that trauma and how it impacts some of those brain, from 0 to 5, the neurons to your brain are firing so much. And to really think about, experiencing some adverse childhood experiences at a young age and really thinking about how that impacts brain health. So there's a good study, and I think I'll copy it in here and put it in the chat so you all have it. So if you want to look at it, I found it to be really interesting. So thinking about that just mental impact, the immediate impacts of, you might not see that brain development, but it's there, it's impacting it as at that moment. And then emotional impacts. So self-esteem, self-blame, isolation, bullying or being bullied, and negative self-talk. One thing that I've experienced just working with kiddos is really just how quick they are to blame themselves for things that happen, that they have no responsibility for, that they should not take any ownership of what they had experienced or what they saw. But there's a lot of that self-blame, a lot of taking that on. And part of that, is really just, thinking about how children, one of the biggest things is their family, their parents are, or their caretakers are their number one. And so when they see, this dysfunction, it's, that self-blame can happen very easily. And that negative self-talk, or even, bullying behavior. So then you start seeing those social skills be impacted. And then, spiritual, I think about just disconnection from the community, being disconnected, seeing, I know for me, it was always seeing, my friends who grew up in very functional homes and always thinking, where's my community? Why I don't fit in here? Just that big disconnection from friends, feeling a lack of purpose or meaning and some hopelessness. And again, it's going to vary by age. It might look very different for a 2-year-old, as opposed to a 12-year-old. So the important thing is just to know, just to be aware and educate yourself on just, early, education, development, early childhood development, or just child development, and really thinking about that. And then there's those long-term impacts as the adverse childhood experiences. Kaiser Permanente and CDC found that there's those long-term impacts, the physical, where it starts, I think all that stress and trauma, kind of manifest into, it could be cancer, diabetes, chronic illnesses, heart disease, and suicide. The mental impacts are depression, anxiety, emotional, again, it's low self-esteem, substance abuse, just aggression, not really knowing how to cope with anger or any type of emotion. And then spiritual, again, is that disconnect from community, friends, a lack of purpose or meaning, and a sense of hopelessness. I think it's also important to note that we know when children are exposed to violence, there's a likelihood that they might, become violent in their relationships, or they might be victims, more likely to be victims in relationships. So, at this young age where they're seeing these relationships unfold in front of them, they're learning that this is what it means to be in a relationship. And so, these things that might become normalized and might become, just something that they in relationships. So these are just some of those impacts. Next slide, please. So there are protective factors. I think when we do this work, and it's always hard, you think about trauma and just the impact, and it's easy to, for me, it's easy to just feel like, then what do we do if we all, experience trauma in our lives, and we're going to have these long-term effects, but we know that there are protective factors. And so protective adults, including the child's mother, relatives, neighbors, and teachers, older siblings, and friends, may all play protective roles in a child's life. So, and I'll just put a non-offending parent, those protective adults. Any protective adult in that child's life is going to make a difference. As a child's resources grow, the problems they may face can decrease and counteract the effects of exposure to domestic violence. So thinking about, as we're advocating and working with schools, we really want to think about all those resources that we can help provide or refer to and partner with, so that all these resources they have can really counter that those effects of domestic violence. And then there's going to be those individual factors. I think it goes, there's always that study of two children who grow up in the same household, and they resiliency is very different. And so there are individual factors, but there's some components of that, and then family components. So again, those protective factors would be just family connectedness, resiliency as a family unit, and then community protective factors. So the community resources that are out there, how safe the community is, and those type of things. So these are all protective factors that we can build for our communities and for our families and for individual kids, so that they're protective. When we look back, we know that, our Native children are exposed to violence 3 times the national average, or amongst any racial groups. We really want to think about, what are those resources we have for families? What are those resources we have for children? and how are they protective, and how do we keep moving that forward? Next slide, please. So this is just a way that teachers can advocate for children exposed to violence, really pushing for trauma-informed training, knowing, what to look for with trauma, what to look for as far as, like I said, young kiddos, it's not so, it might, they can't really just state that they have experienced trauma, but to um, really look at some of those trauma impacts and be informed of that, and then how to respond in a trauma-informed way. I think this is a big one that is very needed and is an ongoing thing. I think there's new science, new research coming out, all the time. And so we really, trauma-informed training should be an ongoing training. And then domestic violence training, really, of the 10 plus years that I worked as an early childhood educator, I had no training on domestic violence. And, I'm spending a good between 8 to 10 hours a day with children. And I had no domestic violence training. So, not knowing the signs, what to look for, or what domestic violence is, and I think a lot of the time we go off based off of what we see in social media and pop culture, which really doesn't get into like those tactics that we just, I showed at the beginning, to really look at those tactics and how it's really just these situations. I had no training on that. And then, how would I respond? How would I, if a parent had come to me and said, I am experiencing this, I wouldn't have known what to do. I wouldn't have known the resources to turn them to, how to respond, safety planning. That wouldn't have even, really crossed my mind. And so it's really important that that teachers and educators have an opportunity to learn about domestic violence and what to look for, and what it is and really what that means. Checking and challenging biases. I think this is a big one because, as advocates, we are trained, believe victims and survivors, no matter what. We believe them. We know those myths out there. We know victim blaming when we see it. But often, a lot of our teachers, a lot of people who work in the schools, just our community, we're inundated with a lot of victim blaming rhetoric, victim blaming culture. And so we really want teachers to really check and challenge their biases that they might have. They might have some victim blaming biases. I've worked with coworkers who were, educators, and why don't they just leave then? Or, she keeps putting her children in danger. She needs to leave, and not knowing, that she might, for her staying, it might be how she's protecting her children. And that, they might not have anywhere to go, and why people don't leave, and how it's much more dangerous when they do leave. The risks are a lot higher. So thinking about that, really thinking about their biases, and checking that and challenging those. Another one, self-care. I think a lot of my friends are educators, and I've known, the past couple of years have been incredibly hard for teachers. We have, dealing with a pandemic, dealing with school shootings, and just a lot of work. It's a lot of time and effort and work with not very much support or resources. So self-care is going to be a big one that I really think, you want to do right by your class, and you want to do right by your children. You have to do right by yourself, and you have to show up for yourself, and you have to care for yourself with I want to add, there's that community care, and it will be on the next slide, but really the responsibility of the school on how are you promoting self-care for your teachers, and the community. How are we showing up for our teachers? How are we showing up for those who are educating our children, working with children? How are we showing up for them? So really thinking about some of those skills, and really, I know it's so hard when I say self-care, because sometimes it's hard, because self-care is not going to really help a lot of things that we're going through if the systems are not working for us. But those little things do make a difference, and that they you showing up for yourself will help you. I know as a parent, for me, it's the same. If I show up for myself and I prioritize myself, I'm a much better parent for it. And it's modeling. I think it's another way that you model that for kiddos who have experienced or who have been exposed to violence, that you're modeling that they are not to be, they don't have to blame themselves, and that they can take care, put themselves first, and that they are deserving and worthy of good care. And then this one's a big one that I think we have a lot of work to do. It's avoid labeling behaviors as problems or bad. I came across a really good quote, and it's from Paula Goodwin from Defending Survivors, and it was on a trauma-informed parent or trauma-informed children network. I can't remember, but I love this quote. Children that have been abused, and I'm going to add been exposed to violence, do not have behavior problems that need to be addressed. They have extreme survival skills that need to be understood. And I think this is a big key. We talk about it as behavior problems, and we label it as behavior problems, which then, when kids hear that, and they might not hear it directly, but they might hear it somehow. And just when we label it as behavior problems, we're already creating, a perception of those children who are, who've been exposed to violence. So when they hear that, that kind of contributes to that self-esteem and that self-blame. So thinking about it, these behaviors that we call problems are really just survival skills that they've, or just needs that they had to survive, and haven't, because when we think about exposure to violence and trauma and stress, these things kind of stay. They don't just go away, because, if they are now, not being exposed to violence, that impact doesn't just go away. And so I think it's really important for us to not label them as bad or problems, because then there's just this negative thing attached to it. And if we start looking at it, this kind of goes into that trauma-informed way of thinking. If we look at it as, okay, they, have been in their household, it's been dysfunction, and this is kind of just their way of processing it. So how do we, instead of looking at it as a behavior problem needing to be fixed, it's really, how do we fix, and not even fix, but how do we connect in a way that shows them they're safe, that they're loved, and that, their classroom's a safe place. Often I see, we often use it as challenging behaviors. And as a teacher, I get it. When you have, 20 other children in your classroom, and, you're the only adult there who can really, who has to attend to all of students' needs, like it's a big thing. It's a lot to ask of one person. And so this is, when I think about teachers advocating, it's really going to be advocating to also your administration to really, if you notice, hey, this kiddo has been going through a lot, I need the support, I need the resources that you need to funnel into this classroom so that we can show up And so really thinking about that, we really want to avoid that labeling, and just, reframe it as it's as simple as just extreme survival skills that we need to understand, and then, go from there. One thing we always talk about with my kiddo around Christmas, and we've had to talk about this a lot, is no kid is bad. There's no such thing as a naughty list. Kids are all learning. They're learning. They are, kids, one of the biggest ways they learn is by, through social modeling. So, what they see is kind of what they act out. You'll see even, when kids play house, or when they're playing with their toys, a lot of it is, that's kind of how they process what they're learning, and categorizing as, this is what I need to do to, this is how we behave. This is what is expected of me. And sometimes when, there's a lot of things going on, those skills are not always there. And so it's not because they're bad or that they have problems. It's literally that they haven't had the time or the space, or, the opportunity to really work through that. So if we kind of reframe that, it changes it, kind of changes that stigma and that labeling, which is important. And then again, going with that social modeling, interacting with students in positive ways. So, when they walk into a classroom, be really enthusiastic with being so happy to see them. And I mean, this can vary, it varies. There's some kiddos who don't want a lot of that attention. So you'll find other ways to be positive when you interact with them. But, really thinking about just being positive and showing that positivity will go a long way. I'm going to share another thing that I found on Facebook, and it's through the Hand in Hand Parenting. They have a lot of good resources out there, not just for parenting, but just, as advocates, we can start thinking about these things, or teachers. But something that they posted was what happens when a child feels connected. The self-preservation center of the brain is relaxed and signals the body that all is well. The social and emotional hub of the mind generates feelings of confidence, safety, and the assurance that all is good. The part of the brain responsible for reasoning, impulse control, short-term memory, and judgment lights up. And then when all parts of the brain are feeling safe and connected, a child can remember what they learn, develop new skills, and improve their judgment. So, interacting in a positive way is really any way that you can build connection. And that the benefits of building a connection are huge. They are impactful and they're important. And so really thinking about that, thinking about how you can build that connection is going to be so important. Next slide, please. So administrations, for advocating for children exposed to domestic violence, again, providing resources for teachers, providing those trainings, paid trainings, the time for those trainings, and teachers aides, or extra staff who can really help out in the classroom, so that you can be there and give a lot of support for children who have been exposed to violence. Hire people who are specialized in domestic violence. So have someone on hand. I know counselors, hire people who are specialized in that. Or have someone in your school that has that specialized training. And that could even mean partnering with an advocacy program, your community-based advocacy program. Again, providing paid days off for those trainings, provide paid time off for teachers' well-being. Like I said, it's been a really hard couple of years, and it's really hard. I think one thing that we are going to learn, and that we are learning, is that we've all been through a lot of stress and trauma and grief the past couple of years. And so, usually, as advocates, we are there to be supportive to those who are in crisis and who are, leaving violent situations. And now we are also in, a lot of trauma, grief, stress, and just all of those things. So really taking the time off for that well-being is going to be important. And then provide resources for families and children, safe rooms, education nights with childcare. Another big one, I think, is linking to just my experience as an advocate. One big thing with schools was really understanding those who were in DV shelters or transitional housing, or who had left their homes. Really understanding the McKinney-Vento Act, and understanding how, they are still, that provides your, family's rights to attend that school, and even, transportation. So if they need transportation to get to school, that they have that right. So making sure that, families know their rights as, as they're, working through, if they are in a shelter or find themselves, not in their homes. The school really needs to make sure that parents are aware of their rights. They also should, really be informed on, one thing I see is, if there's no restraining order, unfortunately, or a court order, that the abusive parent can pick up children from school. So, really being aware of that, and then, knowing how to safety plan for that. So there's a lot of good things that you can do to help children and parents who are in the crisis. Again, you really want to partner. You want to make sure that you have good partnerships with those resources, those community resources, community programs that offer resources to families who have fled violence. And that could be, the Title I office. So that's, children experiencing homelessness due to domestic violence, working with your community-based advocacy program, and really just making sure that you have that, those at hand so that you can inform parents of those resources and of those rights. These are just, just some piece. And I think policies and protocols are another. You want to make sure that you have good policies in there that really address how you're responding to children exposed to violence, and what that process looks like. I think a big thing is, what are your teachers' responsibilities, as far as mandated reporting, really how can they be trauma informed. I think a big one is, especially when working with non-offending parents, this fear that there's judgment or that they might not be good parents. And so as a school, how do you support non-offending parents who are going through this, and really how do you provide support for them to be the best parent that they can be? If we go back, we know that resiliency and really, those protective factors are going to be that relationship between the non-offending parent and the children. So really, how are you promoting and offering support to that parent? Next slide, please. And then again, just how advocates can help. We can establish a relationship or collaboration with the school. So again, that's going to be, talking to administrators, talking to teachers, talking to even, bus drivers and just staff that you find, really establishing those relationships. And you can do that really, I think about, like sporting events, if you can ask to have a booth there, sporting events or any event that schools have, they have going on, going to the school board meeting, really just finding creative ways that you can establish a relationship with the schools. Often I find, when we talk about a coordinated community response or a sexual assault response team, a lot of the time the schools are kind of left out of that. Unless, and especially I think when they are, it's more of that teen dating violence, but really thinking about how can we add schools into that response for children exposed to violence. How do we include them in the work that we're doing as advocates? How do we put them, how do we include them to be that response for children and families who have experienced violence? You want to provide schools with trainings on DV. So, talking to administrators about, hey, we'd like to do a 2-hour training. I noticed you have a teacher work day, or can we set this up somehow? But really providing schools with trainings, and it doesn't even be, have to be, all staff, but maybe think about, we're going to provide this. If you want to pay some teachers or staff to attend, please do, or whatever it might look like. Really thinking about just providing that, or, even in your program, if that's something that you do, you add that in. Include resources for children in your domestic violence program. This is a big one, I think, that I found a lot of parents who came in fleeing violence, a lot of the time the biggest resources that they needed and wanted were just some of those things that they didn't feel like they had a right to ask for. And it was, a zoo pass, or, they really wanted to take their kids swimming that summer, or they really wanted to provide, buy pumpkins for their kiddos for Halloween. And, while it was not in our OVW budget, or while our wasn't OVW, but, in our budget that we couldn't provide, but how are we as advocates bringing in other resources to really strengthen that bond of the non-offending parent and the children. One thing that the Hosea Advocate Program does is they have a community garden where they do, for Easter, they did an egg hunt. They've done pumpkin carving. So, they had the community donate pumpkins. So it's really just finding these things, these events that you can really help strengthen that bond of the, for children who are exposed to violence and their primary caretaker who are caretaking for them. And then education booths for community. And really, especially if there's like a school thing happening, a sporting event, or, just even, education conferences. I know we don't really think about, having a booth there, but really having a booth at an education, or, a conference, or, an event that the school's having, a training that they might have, having a booth there to provide information for teachers and educators. And then provide opportunities for families to connect to the community. That kind of, again, goes with, those resources for children, but opportunities for them to connect to the community. And then cultural resources are another big one. How are we, I don't know if any of you all attended the webinar on it was indigenous parenting. I can't remember what it was called, but it was through our children and youth grant. And I loved it because it really talked about parenting and talked about raising children in an indigenous way and those cultural teachings. And I think that's really important. So providing that, and providing education classes or groups, or, on parenting. I think a big one is, with a lot of dysfunction and trauma that happens in the household, and the parent who is trying to hold it all together, really providing resources for them so that they can show up and be the best for their kiddos will go a long way as well. And then, this kind of just goes back to really educating schools on policies and protocols. Are they ensuring that students, or that parents know their rights, if they are victims or survivors of domestic violence, really talking to them about confidentiality and what that means, how important confidentiality is to safety, how that's important. Even thinking about if you're, the school's transporting children to a shelter, maybe it's not the safest thing to just to drop off in front of the shelter, and maybe organize, a shelter advocate to, meet. So really thinking about that, those safety things, and then really just safety, talking to schools about safety and how to help keep children who are exposed to violence safe just all around, whether it's at school or, outside of school. So just having that, again, some policies and protocol on how to screen children who have been exposed to violence. So what to look for. Like I said, when I was, an educator, I had no idea what to look for. I had no idea really what would be the process if, a parent came to me and they were picking up their child and said, I don't want to go home. I don't feel safe. And I don't know what to do. I would have been incredibly unhelpful because I would have not known exactly what to do. I mean, I think, I hope I would, figure it out, but that's where, trauma-informed training comes in, knowing your biases, making sure you don't victim blame, no judgment, because, right away when someone's judging you. So you really want to make sure that there's process, clear protocols for staff if, something happens, or screening children who might be exposed to violence, and how to respond appropriately. And then obviously, mandated reporting. What does that, having a clear idea of what that means. And then again, just being aware of just how important school is, where, I think something we learned with the pandemic is how important schools are for children, especially when they're exposed to violence. It's very important for them. It could be one of their safe spaces. It, could be a space where they're, that might be, where they're going to, where they're getting their meals. So really it's important that we treat that as such, and how do we move that forward? And one moment. Yeah. Sorry, I've got a kid on summer break here. Next slide, please. So I realize I've really talked a lot about children exposed to violence, but there's also teen dating violence when we have to start thinking about, and really at a younger and younger age. When I look at the statistics, when we look at sexual assault, the age range of those who experience that is younger and younger, and even just dating violence, younger and younger. So we really have to think about that. Even, I would say, even elementary schools need to really think. I know it says teen dating violence, but really start thinking about how are we, talking in an age appropriate way to children and youth about consent, about healthy relationships, about all of these things, autonomy, and all of those things we want to think about. But for teen dating violence, I look at the power and control wheel on here, and there's, so there's a lot of tactics, and they're really more relative to teens, and that's the peer pressure, the threatening to expose someone's weakness or spread rumors, a big one, I think. Telling malicious lies about an individual to a peer group. So that peer pressure, and that could even, when it comes down to, anything, just using that peer pressure to control. in that relationship. Anger and emotional abuse. So putting them down, making them feel bad about themselves, name calling, making them think they're crazy, mind games, humiliating, and making them feel guilty. So thinking about that. And then just those anger, kind of threats, using social status. So this one, I think, for teens, I remember being a teen and how important social status was, and I always had adults say it doesn't, you'll get older, it won't matter, but it matters when you are a teen. So, that social status is important. And even just that peer pressure, but here it kind of goes into, treating them like their servant. They get to make all the decisions. They get to act like they're the master of, the castle type of thing. And then they, defining whose role in that relationship. So using their social status. So this could be, privilege, just even popularity, social status, privilege, to maintain power and control. And then isolation and exclusion. So this is, really controlling what they do, really not allowing them to go hang out with friends, jealousy, using jealousy to, really justify that. I think this was a big one for a lot of youth, you think, oh, if they're jealous, that means they really, really like me, and seeing it as, it could be a red flag and it could be violence. Sexual coercion, so making threats or manipulating, sabotaging birth control methods. So, getting them pregnant on purpose. I think drugs and alcohol, using that. Sexual, coercion is just, it's coerced. There's no consent there. Threats, so making threats to hurt or harm, or again, kind of that peer threats, threatening to leave or commit suicide. This one is also something that we see a lot in teen dating violence, threatening suicide, reporting to police, making them do illegal things like that. Minimizing, again, making light of the abuse, saying it didn't happen, or shifting responsibility to, off of the abuser and onto the victim. And then intimidation. So making someone scared by looks, actions, body language, destroying property, phones, things like that. I think another big piece of this is social media and how social media is used, and is something that is can be very harmful. We also know, they call it revenge porn, or, threatening to send, naked selfies to everybody. That's a big one. And so it's really going to be important for you as an advocate, a school, the school, to really know what's going on with the youth, and then the laws that are, I think a lot of people have been working hard to really challenge and hold abusers accountable for a lot of this. Next slide, please. So data from the CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Survey in 2019 indicates that amongst US high school students who reported dating during the 12 months before the survey, 1 in 12 experienced physical dating violence and 1 in 12 experienced sexual dating violence. If we were to look at, our statistics in our Native communities, I would argue it could be higher. It probably is higher than that. Female students experience higher rates of physical and sexual dating violence than male students. Students who identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer, or LGBTQ, are those who were unsure of their gender identity, experience higher rates of physical and sexual dating violence compared to students who identified as heterosexual. So those are some of those risk factors. So again, gender-based violence, and then sexual-based violence. So thinking about that as schools, we really want to make sure that we are responding in a way that who's at more risk, how do we make sure our resources are inclusive of that. Next slide, please. So impacts of teen dating violence. Again, this kind of goes to, those child adverse experiences or, sorry, my brain, our ACEs, it's that depression, anxiety. You engage in behaviors such as tobacco use, drug use, and alcohol use. So risk-taking behaviors. Isolation or antisocial, suicide ideation, and self-harm are some of those, things that you see for teens, really. Next slide, please. So when we think about teachers who advocate for students experiencing teen dating violence, again, you want to be knowledgeable of the signs of teen dating violence. You want to know kind of those tactics that are used. And I think, there are many ways to kind of be creative in figuring out and really connecting with students to create that safe space so that, okay, you're knowledgeable of the signs. Now what? Now what do you do? So trained in trauma-informed care, but really, it's that process, the responsibility. What are you responsible for? Are you mandated to report this? Who do you report to? Do you report it to Title IX if it's happening on school grounds? Knowing all of these processes are going to be really important for you as a teacher to really know what your responsibility is and to not let anyone fall through the cracks, but also, you don't want to scare teens away so that, they don't have that safe space to really express what they're experiencing or what is going on. Again, you want to know those local and national resources, and then you want to talk about healthy relationships. And again, this might be hard, especially if you're, in high school, you're the English teacher, and it's, how do you talk about healthy relationships? But really, it's getting creative and how to incorporate some of these things into the work that you're doing. And then advocating to the school about this is what I'm seeing in my classroom, and this is what I think we need. We need to, have, we need to really be talking about healthy relationships with these kiddos. We really need to make sure that teachers know, what's expected of them. How do they report? And, how do you, talk about that in a trauma-informed way? So let's say you are mandated to report what a student just disclosed. How can you do that in a way, or even before they disclose, so that you're building trust? How do you build trust with the youth that are coming forward and talking to you? And how do you do it in a way that is not harmful or will not re-traumatize, re-victimize, or even, push them away from any resources or help out there. Next slide, please. Administration. So, what you can do is hire an advocate or partner with a local community-based advocate. Someone who can come in once a month and maybe, have, a booth during lunchtime, or, handing out resources, or booklets to the, administration office, or, working with, youth on, let's do a, work on a public service announcement together, or however, you can partner with that community-based advocacy program will go very far. Support student programs or clubs bringing awareness to teen dating violence. So if a student comes to you and says, I want to start this club, how do I do it? Really being supportive and bringing awareness to that. clearly state intolerance of teen dating violence in school handbooks, policies, clearly state, what the consequences of those things are, state the process if, teen dating violence occurs on school grounds or, events sponsored by the school. Really be clear about that. And really, I think a big one is to really take a look at your school climate, culture as a whole, and think about, is there anything that really is perpetuating, not addressing teen dating violence, or not, responding in a good way. So start thinking about that. Again, going with your policies and working with an advocacy program on your policies and protocol, what that looks like. Or even, you could just have the advocacy program look at it and say, is there anything that comes to your mind that might be problematic, or that we might need to add, or we might need to take out? And that will be really important. The next slide, please. So, and as an advocate, you can help really hiring a specific teen dating violence advocate. So someone who really specifically, their role is a teen dating violence advocate. So that might be outreach to schools, really partnering with schools, creating relationships with schools, working closely with the school, that's their specific role, and that's strictly what they do. They respond to teens who need advocacy and support and resources. You want to include resources for teens in your program. And again, this is really just, advocates being aware of mandated reporting, being aware of consent laws, who can give consent, what that age group is, knowing all the intricacies of, a Title IX investigation, what to expect from that, law enforcement, how to work with parents, or, how to work with the schools. So it's really thinking about, do we have all these things in place? And if we don't, how do we get that going? Provide trainings for schools on healthy relationships and teen dating violence. So if you see that the schools aren't doing that, offer that, or say, we're a great resource. Let's figure out how we can work together so we can provide these trainings, not only for staff, but students. And then resources. I think schools, we can say that there's a lot of things that are similar. There are, schools might have different, they might be, they might see teen dating violence more when it comes to their sporting events, or they might see dynamics, whatever, it will look different. So you really want to make sure that you all are kind of seeing what you're noticing in the school and how to address that, and how do you move from there. You want to collaborate with the school, the Title IX officers, administrators, teachers. You want to make sure that you have a good collaboration with them. Like I said, if you have a community response coordinator, community response team, and you notice that the school's not a part of that, bring them on. Find who would be a great fit to join. And it could be a school counselor, or just, a Title IX officer, or anyone really thinking about who's really working directly with students and responding to students who are victims or survivors of teen dating violence. And then those cultural supports. So providing those, I've seen a lot of, ceremonies, camps for youth, and really bringing back those cultural traditional supports and values and teachings into the work that you're doing. That's really a big piece. Next slide, please. So I would just want to leave it with this, kind of going back to that other quote. Instead of asking what is wrong with you, let us ask what happened to you. And I don't know who said this, and I know it's said a lot. And I think I think I heard it from Oprah when she did a book with Dr. Bruce Perry, who does a lot of work on trauma. And really, it's instead of asking what is wrong with you, let us ask what happened to you. So when we're working with children and youth, we really want to approach it as that, something happened, or anyone that we're working with, really. I think this can go just, shaping all of our interactions with everybody is just knowing, what happened to you. I even think about sometimes when I'm out and somebody does something that I'm just, like, I don't understand why you just did that, and then I go back and, it's like, oh, they're a human being with, maybe having a bad day. And while it's not okay to treat someone, the way they treated me, but I can also look at it as we're all human beings with complex things that are going on. We have, we never know what's going on at home. And so, really thinking about that, this is really how to guide our work. And really, when we want to really address trauma with children and youth, we really want to approach it as, it's those survival skills, that we need to understand. It's, understanding what happened to them to really connect with them and create a connection that will protect them and will, help guide them into healing, from this, being exposed to violence or teen dating violence. We're really here as adults, to help them through that. And so I just wanted to kind of end it with that quote, to just think about, and how do we guide our work, use that as a guide for this work that we're doing. And with that, next slide, please. I think are just some of those works cited that I had. But I will open it up to if anyone has questions or comments. Yes, this is recorded, Kathy. And if you have any specific questions, please feel free to reach out to me. It's Raquel at redwind.net. And my phone number is 833-719-9463. And I think our extensions have changed, but you can call that and I think you can find me on that. But please feel free to reach out if you have anything that, you have questions, but you don't, it kind of comes up after this webinar. I'm here. Really, like I said, my experience with this is just from being an early childhood educator and being an advocate, and how to really kind of blend the two together and how we work together to help kiddos and teens heal from violence.
All right, thank you, Raquel. So before we end the session, I want to let you all know that there will be an eval popping up once Zoom closes. We'd love to hear what you thought, so if you're able to fill that out, we'd very much appreciate it. Coming up next in the series is Supporting Male Survivors of Violence, tomorrow at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Again, that is tomorrow at the same time as today. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be uploaded onto Redwind's YouTube channel within the next few days. You can also find previous recordings there. So if there are any different projects that you're interested in, you can find different presenters and things like that. In closing, we'd like to thank our presenter, Raquel. I'd like to thank our captioner, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope you all stay safe, and I hope to see you all at the next webinar.
Thank you.